Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Watches and Style channel. This is Young Brando, your host, live from Los Angeles. We are going to talk about some auction results today and also look forward to some upcoming auctions from across the pond in different parts of the continent. Um, you guys know that there are a few affiliates of Bonhams that I follow quite consistently on this channel, like Brun Rasmussen from Denmark and Bukowski's in Switzerland. I'm going to add to that list perhaps a couple more today, and also in the future as well. We'll get to that momentarily. Um, Yesterday night, we were looking at Ineichen Auctioneers, which is based in Zurich, and being one of the oldest auction houses that focuses on wristwatches, they're also one of the more interesting disruptors in the space. Um, Oftentimes, they put together uh, watches around thematic groupings. Sometimes it's quite inventive, other times it can be quite dull, as is the case with their February collection, which was called simply February Odyssey. We looked at some of the watches yesterday night with about 6 hours to go until the hammer, and the auction has concluded earlier today. So we're going to look at some of the results and even perhaps the results of some of the auctions that we have previewed or we had previewed yesterday. Um, One of the interesting things about Ineichen is they do a lot of online only auctions, which increasingly pretty much every single auction house does at any rate. But what distinguishes them is that they don't charge buyer's premium. So whether you uh, use the buy it now option, which is a lot of times available on their lots, or you go by the hammer price, in either case, what you see is what you get, and what you see is exactly what you will pay. Of course, on top of that, there will be taxes and customs fees, but that's quite inevitable. As you know, Americans love saying this. That there are two things that you can't avoid in this life: death and taxes. So that's a given at any rate. Um, we're going to look at these results. I've already posted the link in the chat. So if you would like me to pay particular attention to any of these lots, please feel free to send in the lot number, and I would be more than happy to dive in and go in with some historical and horological detail. Um, there are some interesting watches, some interesting results, but once again, I think what is most striking is how a lot of the watches, I would say the majority, in fact, were not sold because the bidding had not reached the reserve price. So that's something to keep in mind, something that happens more and more often in smaller auction houses. Uh, the bigger ones are usually much more careful about what they list and the kind of bidders and buyers they lure into the room and have on standby on the phones. So that's a little bit different. But overall, all of this is simply a sign of how much the market has taken a significant downturn and how there are so many deals to be had. As always, my caveat is that I'm not sponsored by any of these auction houses. I don't work for them. I'm not necessarily interested in allowing them to sell more watches. So I will always advise you to study well, make sure that you know what you want, make sure you know what you're looking for the kinds of watches that you're seeking in the market. If you don't know any better, always consult a friend or a professional to provide a second set of eyes for you, to provide a final judgment for you. In most cases, it's great to attend previews and viewings in person, so you can actually take a closer look at these watches, at these examples. In the absence of that, and if you have any specific questions, you should always reach out to them. Remember, it's your money. Remember, they are working for you. And also remember that on paper, contractually, they are obliged and have a fiduciary duty towards the consignor and not to you, which means that you have to stand up for yourself. You have to ask the difficult questions, and you have to really go after the kind of information you are seeking, both independently and through them. When it comes to live events, in the usual auction circuits, of course, everything that would apply in a casino situation, in a sort of gambling situation, applies. I think the dynamics are actually tragically similar, that you should always have a very specific kind of budget and have all sorts of checks and balances, internal and external, that can actually help you abide by that budget, stay right under that upper limit that you set for yourself, both for the particular occasion and also for every single separate watch. So I think I will, in the absence of anyone sending any messages, writing anything in the chat, I'll start with lot one, which was a lot that we didn't actually discuss yesterday. It's a beautiful, if also relatively plain, Patek Philippe pocket watch that we're looking at when it comes to lot number one in the February Odyssey timed auction by Ineichen that concluded just earlier today. But there is indeed a lot of beauty and simplicity. This is a platinum pocket watch, time only, with seconds on the subdial. Interestingly, they have not actually specified the diameter, which seems almost unbelievable. But the watch has applied Breguet numerals and Breguet styled hands, those apple tipped or palm tipped hands that one associates with the house of Breguet in our time. The watch is beautifully decorated on the case with a case band set with diamonds. And there's a snap-on case back which covers the movement and has a monogram, the initials B and C in relief, and a stunning, classically executed pocket watch movement, hand wound, of course, with its bridge plates rendered in German silver. Stunningly deep Geneva stripes on those bridge plates that afford the movement a lot of interesting dimensionality. And overall, the watch seems mildly patinated. The dial possibly has gone through some restoration, I have to say, even though the picture quality is not incredible. I have a sense, both from the signature of the brand on the dial and the way those polished beads for the minutes, the so-called pearl track for the minutes, is somewhat sunken and not as prominent. I get a sense that the dial has seen some sort of restoration, though at what level and by whom would be anyone's guess, really, because I don't think the watch was sold with any sort of documentation, and in fact, it did not sell since it didn't meet its reserve. The highest bid was 25,050 in US dollars. The buy it now option was right around 30,000 or 31,000 US dollars, but no one took advantage of that. And it doesn't really surprise me, even though it is, at least as at first blush, a very beautiful classic pocket watch by Patek Philippe, but it's neither here nor there in terms of condition and presentation. We looked at the white gold gondola with the salmon dial, a watch that's infused with Art Deco styling, both in terms of the execution of the stepped flanks of the rectangular case and the particular fonts chosen for the Arabic numerals, to say nothing of the railroad track for the minutes. Again, an absolutely stunning watch in a white gold case that is very warmly patinated. And this is another watch that didn't sell. And funny enough, the highest bid, which didn't meet the reserve, was quite far away from the buy it now option as well. 8,550, that apparently didn't meet the reserve. The buy it now option was set at 12,550. And this is yet another watch. This goes down in the books once again as a lot that goes unsold in a recent auction by Ineichen. Cloud Ken, thanks for dropping by. Can we look at lot 35? I think that's a huge premium for 18,238 might be a fake buyer. Oh, I mean, in my position, I can't immediately go there, but I'm happy to look at it and assess what's going on there. 18. Yeah, I don't think it's a fake buyer. Um, I'll say this. Many times I have told you that 18238 is one of my favorite references when it comes to the day dates. It's a classic, you get it. Obviously, it is yellow gold, right? That's the 5-digit reference that for the first time introduces the double quickset, so to speak, which allows you to correct both the day and the date from the crown. Very practical. So, in so many ways, you get the vintage feel, all the charm that one associates with the classic Rolex um, flagship model, especially when it comes to the dress watch, yet with a few of the conveniences that are afforded by more modern construction methods. Now, having said that, one of the things, again, I don't tire of saying on this channel is that by and large, unless you are really going for a plain Jane example, I would recommend against buying day dates, vintage day dates, and neo vintage day dates on auction. Why? Because a lot of times the pieces that will be listed happen to be so-called exotic examples with dials from semi-precious stones, um, date and day wheels in various languages. And there are some collectors to this day, right? Even in these new generations of watch collectors, among um, all the hype that surrounds every other Rolex model, among all the hype that still carries through with stainless steel sports watches, there are still a lot of collectors who focus almost to the point of exclusivity on the day dates. And they would pay through the nose for anything that happens to be in a decent condition and with a special kind of dial. Now, this is an onyx dial and has uh, the Arabic day and dates. It would have a special person waiting for it. I think 51,200 in US dollars for this particular lot. To my taste, to my sensibilities, I agree with you, Cloud. I think it's unconscionable. Um, for me, I always advise, even if you are really pining for some of these more exotic dial options, whether we are talking about wood dials, semi-precious stone dials, or any variant of the Stella dials for the day dates, I would always advise that you go out in the markets, be patient, get the best condition reference, the best condition example of the reference that you're seeking. Get it with the most plain Jane dial you can find. If it's the 18238 day dates, find one with the champagne dial, get a good deal on it, then go back out into the markets or to a store like First Class Dials, which does a lot of online sales too, even though they are based right here in downtown LA, and source the dial you want for the watch. And 99% of the time, you will have gotten a Rolex day date with a special dial at a fraction of the cost. And you're not fooling anyone, right? You know what you're getting. You know what kind of dial change and dial swap that you're requesting. And it is going to be your damn watch. You can wear it, configure it, and if you want, customize it in any way you please. And I would say, from the perspective of a vintage Rolex collector, looking for different kinds of dials for your day dates is really part of the game, part of the quest, part of the aspiration. Anyways, I don't think there's anything wrong or untoward with that. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that allegedly this is some kind of planted buyer or something. I don't think that's the case at all, even though I find the price unconscionable in the same way. I would get Ken, like you said, 18238 with a champagne dial. I think it's perfect as it is. If you ask me, the Tony Soprano special, so to speak, the perfect mob watch, especially if you want to topple your uncle and show it up to him because he wears a simple date just. That's the watch to get. But even if you are pining on top of that for a different dial color, let's say a blue dial, let's say an onyx dial, say lapis lazuli, go back out into the market and source that dial and go crazy if you want. Go crazy and pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for the exact dial you want because it's OEM, it's original, and it's not harvested from a watch, but is actually new old stock. You are still around the $20,000 mark, and you won't have to go into a competition or, with all due respect, into a pissing contest with a special kind of collector who just has to have this particular Arabic day dates onyx style watch. And it is a beautiful piece, right? Now that we are at it, let's take a nice look at it. I like how it goes with the Eastern Arabic numbers for the dates as well, to match the Arabic day 2. This is, of course, Saturday, right? A Sabt, Shabbat, so to speak. And the watch looks good. I mean, it's not the best example, the crispest day date I have seen, but overall it looks good. The bracelet seems to have a little bit of a stretch, right? So again, you're paying all that premium for a dial and 2 wheels for the day and dates. And from my standpoint, that's just not worth it. I would rather get a plain Jane 18238 with the champagne dial and a nice tight bracelet. I would live with that. But on top of that, if you actually want to source a dial, there's so many options. And if you are by any chance in that situation, feel free to shoot me an email and I can put you in touch with the right people as well. But good catch, Ken. I think that was That was a nice piece to highlight for sure. Speaking of Art Deco designs, this was another gondola that we highlighted yesterday. Also unsold. If lot number 2 in a way harkened to a more reverso-esque feel, this is a Patek gondola that's pretty much one-to-one rendition of Cartier's tank, especially the Tank Louis, in terms of its particular shape. This watch also happens to have an onyx style, which is always a great complement to a yellow gold case. And I think this kind of unadorned look that simply has the brand's signature and the Swiss writing at 6 o'clock is the absolute best way of handling it. And you know, Rolex also has a similar tradition with their selection of semi-precious stone dials in their back catalog, where they take this sort of minimalist approach, so you can actually take pleasure in the unique visual quality that those stone dials provide. Once again, we have a similar situation, though, in terms of the bidding. The highest bids that the watch received was 9,700, which has quite a chasm between itself and the buy it now price. And this once again didn't meet the reserve. Honestly, again, obviously the consigner may have pushed for a certain reserve price, and I understand that it's their rights, but I really don't see today's market valuing a watch like this in 5 digits, right? I really don't think this is a $10,000 watch. A Patek Gondola is a classy watch. It's a beautiful watch. It's a gorgeous, discreet, and a very elite alternative to just a normal Cartier tank. But would I pay $10,000 or more for it? I don't think so. I think this watch could be a good deal for 7.5, 8. But the highest bid that it received at 9,700 was already too much for it, and it didn't even meet the reserve. This was a Patek Philippe Gondola 4269, a Patek tank basically with an onyx style, which did not sell at lot number 3. Thank you, Ken. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, uh, that's one thing. You know, we were talking about yesterday. We were talking about how Ineichen is trying to basically, provide this edge and get ahead of the competition because they're eliminating the overhead by and large, focusing again, not exclusively, but frequently on online auctions. And, they are also enticing the potential buyers by eliminating the buyer's premium as well. But a lot of times I get really frustrated by their listings, by their lots, because there are not enough pictures. Sometimes there are videos of the particular watch, sometimes there aren't. there's hardly any information about the particular example and the kind of collaterals that come with it. If they say there are collaterals, box, papers, and whatever else, sometimes they're not pictured. That's easy to do. You know, it can be part of a spread where you can see exactly what kinds of documentation you are getting. And there are a lot of times when I see the watch in the pictures, which doesn't necessarily match the watch that is described in, pardon me, in the lot essay and the specifications. So eliminating the overhead is great. Transferring that to your clients in terms of better deals is even better, but you still have to be very specific in what you're providing, and you still have to make sure that you operate at an important at an acceptable level of service. And by the way, that was a great thumbs up, Cloud Ken, for your super stickers. So I genuinely appreciate that. Reminding everyone to upvote. That's great service. Lot number 6 is an example of an A series Royal Oak Jumbo, the first series of the Jumbo. It's not perfect. It's a decent example. So you can see why no one enthusiastically clapped the buy it now price, which could have been a decent enough deal if the watch was absolutely perfect. The things that are going for it, the original dial, which has taken this kind of slate gray blue shade from the original black and blue, very desirable, at least to my taste. The case, the bezel, and the bracelets, I wouldn't say they are unpolished, but they still largely preserve the contours of the original design. The crown is the unsigned original, which is good again. The clasp has been changed, right? For the A series, it should be Audemars Piguet written out rather than the initials logo. So the clasp seems to have been changed in a service. And this may or may not be a deal breaker for some. It's also personalized, engraved on the case back with the initials of a previous owner, as well as a date, which is seemingly April 27th, 1978. The notes records that the hands have been changed in a service, replaced by AP with tritium hands as well. So not original, but at least matching roughly the luminous material in the hour markers. The highest bid that came in for this particular piece was 44,350, which didn't meet the reserve and which was almost $30,000 away from the buy it now option that was fixed at almost $74,000. The two examples of the owl, which is, you guys might know, one of my favorite references. This is the 25,594, and these are not the earliest examples of this reference, which you can easily tell from the scale of the tapestry. The earlier examples, let's say Mark 1 of the reference 25,594 of the day date and phases of the moon, has a tapestry pattern that's very similar to what is retrospectively called petite tapisserie for the jumbo, right? That finer pattern that's much more subtle. And another way of telling the early examples is also the classic signature, which is updated into this more contemporary version with the capital letters or with the initials highlighted or heightened just a tiny bit. The hour markers are also a little stubbier in these versions compared to the earlier examples. But overall, I think this is a very interesting sweet spot or offering when it comes to complicated Royal Oaks. Aesthetically very appealing, I think. Incidentally, this is one of those Royal Oak references that I much prefer in two-tone. There are examples of this in two-tone where you have like a silver dial, and it just looks absolutely stunning. Let's see if I can find an example that I had posted earlier, maybe late last year on my Instagram, which if you haven't so far, which you should most certainly follow. If I can find this very quickly, I'll show you. Obviously, there was a time, and this is still the case, right? A lot of these kinds of complicated AP Royal Oaks are offered in the mid-sized case, which was right around 36 millimeter at the time compared to the 37 millimeter today. Certainly the day dates and the moon phase that is called the owl because of the aesthetic of the dial layouts is a great example to that. And sometimes you can find them, in fact, cheaper compared to the time and date version of the same size. That would be, for example, 14790. Right? And the reason for that is a lot of times, of course, the service costs. I've never quite understood myself the people who call these movements finicky or fragile. I always have the sense that a lot of these people wear these kinds of watches as if they would wear a Rolex sports watch. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a fair comparison. Here's what I was talking about. Specifically, the 25594 SA, right? ST is the all stainless steel version, and BA would be all in yellow gold. But I think this is actually one of those references that just looks smashing in its two-tone execution. And ultimately, you end up getting some of the aesthetics of a perpetual calendar look, even though, of course, the functionality, the complication here is a lesser kind, so to speak. This is a less complicated watch. You don't have that perfect balance of the perpetual calendar dial layout as it characterizes the Royal Oak, but nevertheless, you have a very, very pretty, very appealing watch that is quite elegant, and that also happens to be relatively compact compared, well, considering the complication. 36 millimeters in diameter and 9 millimeters in thickness. Of course, the original Jumbo 5402 would be 7 millimeters in thickness, and one of the most popular references and one of the most ubiquitous, 15202, which was discontinued on the 50th anniversary in 2022, giving its place, to the 16202 with the new in-house movement caliber 7121. That is around 8 millimeters thick. So this is a great watch, a great compromise, you might say. Looks great in stainless steel and opaline white. I do prefer them in two-tone. And you can, in fact, find them in two-tone much cheaper, and even cheaper than a lot of the 14790s, which are just time and date. So if you are not afraid to bite the bullets, so to speak, these can be a really interesting deal. All of that being said, this one didn't sell, even though the highest bid was 22,750. The bite now price, I think, is a little bit out of touch. So I'm not surprised no one triggered it. That was lot 7. Lot 8 is basically a blue dial example of the same. That carried an extra premium and didn't sell at 36,400, which I find unbelievable. And I think the buy it now price of 42,100 in that case was absolutely delusional. But again, it's not surprising, right? I have a preference for the two-tone version of this reference, almost without exception, when it comes to these two classic Jarajanta designs. And you can basically apply this across the board. Still to this day, stainless steel examples will actually hold a premium over two-tone examples. And over time, again, as a rule of thumb, pending further study and a detailed look and zooming in, it's almost always the case that stainless steel's pieces have over time held better value, offered better value retention than two-tone and precious metal pieces. And again, for people who are coming from outside into the hobby, that might sound dissonant, but it's one of those truths, one of those facts of the watch market. I highlighted also the square version of the Royal Oak, reference 6005, the SA, again, the two-tone execution. This was basically a reference that existed for the first half of the 80s. It was a platform for AP to test out some of their quartz movements that they were hesitant to introduce across the Royal Oak lineup. It didn't take them long. They did that anyways, but in the meantime, 6005 served as a platform to launch that. Again, something of an acquired taste, something of an hybrid, somewhere between a Royal Oak and, say, a tank on an integrated bracelet. It has the same conveyor belt style bracelet as the Royal Oak, the same tapestry dial that characterizes that watch, but a coarse movement. With the lack of a date and the unique case shape, it can appeal to a certain kind of collector, and I know this piece has its fans. Once again, an unsold lot number 9, since no one bothered with the buy it now price at 9,100, and the highest price it reached, which didn't meet reserve, was far away from that buy it now option as well, 5,250. Here's one that sold, and incidentally at a price where, the market is going for at this point in time. Obviously, with the revitalization that the Daniel Roth brand has received at the hands of Louis Vuitton, and specifically through La Fabrique du Temps with the new Tourbillon des produced seems to have really incited the secondary markets, seems to have really bumped up the price points for some of these watches. And the chronographs are some of the most popular. These, of course, belong to that period of the brands. And I talked about this earlier so many different times, but it bears repeating. In the late 90s, when the brand was already acquired by the Hourglass, by the Singapore-based retailer, and where a lot of Daniel Roth's offerings were transmuted and transformed into models that can be produced in larger numbers and that can perhaps have a broader basis of appeal commercially. So that meant, for example, rather than having a hand-wound Lemania CH27 based chronograph in this double ellipse case, what you had instead in this period was the so-called master's chronograph, which was a self-winding piece built on the base of the Zenith El Primero, in this case DR 500. And there were increasingly a lot of stainless steel examples as well. But this is in 18 karat pink gold. And as you can see, the aesthetics of it are quite similar to what Daniel Roth used in his earlier job, where he was entrusted with reviving Breguet for a new age of wristwatches. So you have, again, a dial that is engine turns, here rendered in that pinstripe or gadroon configuration of the pattern, vertical stripes. You have a Breguet frosted track for the hours, which are rendered in Roman numerals. And of course, you have an entire set of hands fashioned in stainless steel and heat blued, and that is the case for hour and minutes, as well as the chronograph hands, which include, of course, the centrally deployed chronograph seconds hands too. And you have, of course, as a feature of the Zenith El Primero movements, the date indication at 4:30 as well. Here's a look through the case back. Where you can see the Zenith El Primero movement base. Nothing to necessarily write home about, but not particularly homely looking either. It's a decent, more industrial rendition of decoration. Obviously, the details of finishing inside and out, even in precious metal cases in this period, don't necessarily come close to the earlier era of true independent Daniel Roth. But the aesthetics are still there, and there is enormous appeal in these watches. Perhaps not at the price points they seem to have reached more recently. I'm sure some of this excitement will dissipate. I'm sure some of this hype will die down, especially as the market continues to take a sharper downturn more broadly. So if you feel like you missed the boat, or if you feel like the train has left the station and you're really pining for a Danny Roth and you have not acquired one so far, I would say sit tight, wait this one out. A couple of years down the line, I think there will be better opportunities at acquiring some of these watches, which are, relatively speaking, are in limited number, but they're not nearly as rare as the more finely made, the more high horological pieces that belong to that first period of Daniel Roth as an independent, roughly from 1988 to 1995. This piece sold for $19,350. That was the hammer price when the auction concluded, with a total of 11 bids at lots number 12. A couple of very interesting ladies' pieces by Daniel Roth that are, in one instance, that is distinguished by 2 rows of brilliant cut diamonds that frame the unique shape of the case and the dial. And here you have both a very interesting bracelet and, once again, brilliant cut diamonds that are set on the bezel of the double ellipse case. These 2 watches also didn't sell. I'm not necessarily surprised. Ladies Daniel Roth is at least not yet a thing, especially not at these prices. But lot 15 was a watch that we talked about, and a watch that was already sold yesterday when we were talking, because someone actually jumped the gun and went with the fixed buy it now price and bought the watch for 51,200. That's not exactly the deal of the century, but at least within that era, the hourglass era, for example, between 95 and 2000, before they ended up selling the brand to Bulgari, this watch is probably the one to get, especially in this limited edition, because this 1998 run of jump hour pieces was basically the swan song of the namesake of the brand with the Daniel Roth brand. After that, he slowly dissociated himself and is today finally working on his own, making these 2-minute tourbillons from scratch, 2 or 3 pieces per year, I believe, under the name Jean Daniel Nicolas, combining his name with the name of his son and his wife at his Le Sentier home. But the papillon, which takes its name, the butterfly, from the unique design of its dial, was basically his last project with the Daniel Roth brand, a jump hour watch with an oversized subsidiary dial for seconds at the center, a trapezoidal opening at the traditional 12th hour for a digital display of hours. And you also have two arrow tips that make a rotation in 2 minutes around the center of the dial. So they end up showing the minutes 0 to 60 on a scale that takes the form of an upward facing crescent in the lower half of the dial. And the dial, in addition to being engine turned by hand with these beautiful decorations, with these various patterns in the style that was traditionally associated with Breguet, also has this multi-dimensional and literally multi-leveled quality to it that really brings that butterfly shape which jumps out of the dial into a sharper relief. Both the seconds hand and those two arrow tips are heat blued, so you have that perfect legibility and the aesthetics of those hands contrasting with the guilloche decorated silver dial. Silvered, I should say, dial. This is an example in white gold, which was one of 110 examples. And that is a fact inscribed in this solid gold rotor weight, which is very handsomely decorated and is inscribed for the 10 years of Daniel Roth and numbered accordingly for each watch. Lot 15 was sold yesterday at the fixed price for 51,200. One of the most underrated watches, perhaps, of all time. This is Lot 17, the IWC Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar in 18 karat yellow gold. The Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar was introduced in 1985, and as it happened, it was only the second perpetual calendar chronograph that was made in series, which is quite amazing, right? In the sense, I should say, the second brand, IWC, became only the second brand to produce a perpetual calendar chronograph in series after Patek Philippe. And it was quite a feat, right? And when we talk about serial production, of course, between the 1518 and 2499, you don't really have an enormous number of those watches. We're talking about hundreds, not thousands. And obviously, the 3970 itself was introduced in 1986. So when IWC came out with the Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar, it was quite a statement. And what made it an even bigger statement was its relatively humble origins on the base of the ever-present, ubiquitous workhorse chronograph movement base Vajou 7750. The urban myth goes that Kurt Klaus came up with the idea for this module for the Vajou 7750 one morning when he took out his dog for a walk, and the rest is history. Of course, in 10 years, in 1995, IWC also introduced a successor to this reference. Reference IW 3750 is the perpetual calendar chronograph in 1995 to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Da Vinci perpetual calendar chronograph. They also released the IW 3751, which added the 10th hand to this watch to celebrate 10 years of IWC Da Vinci perpetual, and added therefore also the split second function, what the French call the rattrapante, and what the Germans call the Doppelchronograph. And of course, that was a module conceived by Richard Habring, who, of course, today runs his independent brand out of Austria with his wife, with his partner, Maria Habring, Habring too. So even though this piece has been a sleeper, it seems to be getting the kind of shine or attention that I think it truly deserves. These pieces are incredibly underrated, and I would say still a great bargain in stainless steel, especially. The design is amazing with the stepped bezels and the hooded lugs. It almost reminds you as perhaps a more robust and steampunk inspired iteration of Gérard Janta's Cartier Pasha. And to that extent, I'm sure this is one of those models that have been many times claimed to have been designed by Gérard Janta. This is not the case. The designer's name is Hanno Burcha, who was inspired by a Da Vinci sketch, in fact, in coming up with this design. The mushroom topped pushers have always been a particular visual delight for me. And I think they do complement the larger aesthetics of the case too. As you can see, the moon phase indicator is beautifully rendered and given a place of prominence at 12 o'clock, which is something I really love as a placement when it comes to the moon phase indicator. This particular example, unsurprisingly, has a German calendar. And of course, what was quite distinctive about this particular module was the 4-digit display of dates between 7 and 8 o'clock. And of course, the ease of synchronized adjustments that you can undertake with the crown. It's really one of the seemingly humble and unassuming but path-breaking modules ever invented in devising such a complicated movement out of such a ubiquitous, omnipresent caliber base. It's really complication simplified. There's no better way of putting it. This was also a beautiful set with that briefcase style presentation box that had one of the best marketing shticks that Günter Blümlein came up with, because they were literally presented with a vial that you can see here that would update the 4-digit date display for the next century. I mean, imagine, right, as a marketing angle, with everything that a perpetual calendar inspires, you're also planting the seed of that idea in the mind of your customer to say, this is going into the next century, right? That this is a true heirloom that will stay with you your entire life, and it will even outlast you and carry on to the next century. It's really, really amazing in terms of way of presenting the already laudable capabilities of this watch. So because of the condition of this piece, the impressive presentation of the full set, perhaps things are falling into place a little bit more, because this piece hammered at around 14,250, which is not altogether bad, again, for a full set IW 3750, the Da Vinci Perpetual Calendar in a precious metal, in this case in 18 karat yellow gold. That was lot 17 for the February Odyssey auction of Ineichen, Zurich. In the meantime, please hit the like button. It helps a great deal. For a small channel like this, that's my primary way of growth, right? It really puts my videos in front of more eyes, gives me a little bit of a boost in terms of exposure. So if you could do that, I would very much appreciate it. I would also appreciate if you could share the link with fellow collectors and other watch enthusiasts. Spread the word so you can help me expand this community that we have been building around the passion for and knowledge of wristwatches. We are celebrating 2 years. February 2022 is when I first started uploading videos on this channel. And it's been basically 2 years. So I have actually set up the live stream already for Thursday, where we will get to celebrate. So I would love to see all of you there. And I set the time to begin at 8, but I might try to start a little earlier as well, or alternatively just go well beyond perhaps the midnight mark, which is when I usually end my live streams, which gives us around another hour tonight. So Patek Philippe, as you might remember, made a relatively significant, but also barely noticeable change in its world time reference in 2019, already 5 years ago. On the city's ring, what once marked Hong Kong was changed to Beijing, perhaps as a way of recognizing and even paying respects to the Chinese market, to the mainland market. And here is a world timepiece in white gold with a intricately engine turned dial center in white gold. Of course, the world time is a classic. It's one of those worldly and complicated pieces that have become definitive of the brand, that have made Patek the master of complications, so to speak, since the 30s, since the takeover of the Stern family. Patek introduced the reference 1415 HU for Heure Universelle, which we can loosely translate to world time. And that's what Patek does as well in 1939. So, in many ways, this watch was the one that opened that era of complications for Patek Philippe. Of course, the perpetual calendar and perpetual calendar chronograph were soon to follow by Patek in 1941. So, in many ways, in wristwatch form, rendering Louis Cotier's complication has become a mainstay and has become a prestige watch by Patek Philippe ever since then. What is it now? Almost exactly 85 years. There has been a world time wristwatch in Patek's catalog, and the watch has taken its perhaps perfect, but certainly the modern contemporary form with a pusher at 10 o'clock, which helps you cycle through time zones with utmost ease, jumping the hour hand at 1 hour increments at a time, even as it manipulates the 24 cities ring, where each city name stands for a specific time zone as well. Of course, one of the things that some of us really cherish about so many different world time references is that sleek elegance, which is really undergirded by the fact that they are powered by a micro rotor movement. Obviously, a micro rotor movement as a rule of thumb, will be thinner than a self-winding movement with a full rotor, since you are sinking your oscillating weights to the same level as the bridge plates. And that also has, in addition to this technical achievement, also an aesthetic purpose, or at the very least an aesthetic consequence as well. It allows you to admire the rest of the movements with minimal interruption as well. And that's certainly the case with Patek's caliber 240, which is a movement base that has served Patek pretty well through the decades. You might be surprised to find out that it was actually a movement designed for Patek by someone they recruited from Université Genève. And caliber 240 was actually, I'm blanking out on the name. I want to say it was Gérard Perret. I'm pretty sure the last name is Perret, but was the first name Gérard? Sorry, guys. I do apologize about that, but I know for a fact that this gentleman, or Gérard Perret, my mistake. My mistake. That was the micro rotor movement caliber 240, which for a long time was the micro rotor movement base for Patek, was designed by Gérard Perret, who used to be part of Universal, but became later on the technical director for Patek Philippe, and designed this movement for Patek, which has served them well over the years. Lot 20, all of this being said, actually did not sell, even though the bidding went all the way up to 36,400. And the buy it now price was set at 44,350. And of course, Jamie Opulence is there in the chat. Utmost finesse, cycling through the time zones. He appreciates the world time watches, and especially Patek's world time watches, as a collector. He himself has a lovely example of it with Cloisonné dial, which actually matches his wife's own beautiful ladies version as well. And that's a beautiful his and hers too, especially for couples who might find themselves in different parts of the globe sometimes, in different cities, in different countries, right? Wearing different versions of a world time watch that somehow beats with the same heart, right? That is powered by the same movements, is in and of itself an interesting horological metaphor, as it were, for the perfect, or for at least the ideal of synchronization that a couple aims to achieve. It's a very, very interesting pair. I think it's only second to Horology Ancienne's couple of one-of-a-kind, unique reference, his and hers minute repeaters that, in fact, are assigned a unique reference number by Patek specifically for him, as a gesture of this very unique relationship and collaboration. But it's most certainly beautiful. Let me see if I can find actually any pictures of the two for Mr. and Mrs. Opulence. There we go. There we go. This is Jamie's, the 5231J. And this is Mrs. Opulence, the 7130R. And the other his and hers that I was talking about, which is probably the only one that can rival what we were talking about there, is the 5240 and 4940. These two uniquely made minute repeaters, one in a more masculine and the other in a more feminine execution. Oof. Not a bad set. Down to the interlinked heart pattern that decorates the case band. I think this is a very interesting combination. But both are quite aspirational, if you ask me. Love it. Gotta love it. Thanks for reminding me, Jamie. Those are great. Lot 23, this is basically the forgotten stainless steel integrated bracelets piece. A creature of the 90s, really, the Patek Philippe Neptune with the asymmetric dial, with the moon phase display. Unsurprisingly, powered by the same micro rotor movements that gave us the 3712, and of course, more recently, the 5712. Iterations, versions of the Nautilus that have garnered a cult following in their own right, next to the Jumbo. The Neptune was a kind of segmenting design, you might say, to use the marketing language. the design of it is quite divisive, of the opinion, when it comes to collectors. I have to say there's a lot I like about this watch, but there are things about the watch that don't quite sit with me, that are not quite what I would like. The font for the Arabic numerals, for example, really grates me, even though at least it seems to coordinate, it seems to somehow go with everything else that is on the dial as well. But overall, there's something about this watch that never quite sat well with me, except for the fact that I am an enormous fan of that um, scaly snakeskin style integrated bracelet. I think it's one of the best bracelets ever designed. Now, I've never owned this watch, so I don't really know how it wears on a day-to-day basis, but in terms of the sheer visual aesthetics, it has to be right up there for me, perhaps right after the Royal Oak bracelet in terms of what pleases me aesthetically. The reference number here is 5085A, A for acier, of course, stainless steel. You see once again the caliber 240 movement base. Here, of course, the bridge plates bear the hallmark of Geneva, since this watch comes from a period where Patek still stuck with that tradition. Of course, around 2009, they switched to their own seal, which, you know, is always, for me, when it comes to watch brands, and not only Patek, always a suspicious sign, right? As a rule of thumb, as a matter of principle, I always, of course, trust a third party oversight, a third party's oversight compared to these sorts of self-regulatory, and you might say even self-congratulatory, more recent traditions. But yeah, that bracelet is really amazing. I mean, I guess you can liken it to a beads of rice bracelet, but the design of it and the way each interlink is shaped like a scale is quite unique. And I do love the dial layout. I think, in fact, I like everything about the dial except for the numerals. I just wish they designed it a little differently, and maybe came up also with a different handset, perhaps, for the Neptune, for this particular watch. But it has to remain a creature of the 90s. For those who actually like the design, they used to be a great deal. No longer. I mean, compared to a stainless steel Nautilus, compared to a 5712, of course, they can be bought at a fraction of that price. But it's one of those watches that you really need to fall in love with, because it's it's an acquired taste, and you would not be able to move it easily once you actually go for it, once you actually buy one of these. I would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button in the meantime. This was a piece that didn't sell at lot 23, with the highest bid reaching 27,300. I would say they were asking for way too much. Forget about the bite now. That's 34,000 plus. I think they were a little misguided in this, so I'm not surprised that it didn't sell. I'm just going to quickly grab a drink of water and soldier through the remaining 40 minutes. I want you to, in the meantime, enjoy looking at this classic Breguet tourbillon. That is lot number 24, sorry, lot number 25, the 3354. $33.58. What am I saying? I will be right back. All right, I'm back. We are looking at the results from the February Odyssey auction from Ineichen Zurich. Since they fall under the radar oftentimes, and since they forego the buyer's premium, it might be a place to find good deals. But more recently, they have had a lot of auctions where they had a lot of reserve prices at levels that I consider to be a little out of touch, a little bit out of touch with the realities of today's markets. So a lot of watches go unsold. This one is an exception. Again, an early reference of the Breguet tourbillon. This is once more a watch that has Daniel Roth's fingerprints all over it. Daniel Roth, from today's standpoint, where producing, making your tourbillon wristwatch has become a rite of initiation. Perhaps this is changing more recently, but that was for such a long time the case for any independent watchmaker worth their salt. Daniel Roth basically invented that game. Before Daniel Roth, of course, there were tourbillon wristwatches, but in extremely limited numbers, and none that really reimagined that regulatory mechanism as an aesthetic exhibition, an aesthetic exposition of the mechanical wristwatch in the post-quartz age. It was really his work in devising the movements, which became here the Breguet 558, with Lemania that allowed it, and overall it was the 3350 with Breguet, and later on his own C187 that ushered in a new era for the tourbillon and for tourbillon wristwatches. It's hard to imagine an FP Jaune tourbillon souverain in a world where Danny Roth didn't exist, where he didn't revive Breguet, where he didn't reimagine the tourbillon for the wristwatch. This is actually a very exquisite version of it, framed with diamonds on the bezel and on the extended lugs of the case. Of course, the tourbillon cage is framed through a cutout in the lower third of the dial, with an elegant but non-ostentatious bridge. Hand engraving on the base plate. And finally, both the screws and the three-pronged hands for the seconds are heat blued. The seconds are shown in a 20-second scale, on a 20-second fan-like scale that overlaps with an off-center dial that is part of a mother of pearl face decorated by the arts of engine turning in two different patterns. Stylized Breguet numbers for the hour markers, and heat blued Breguet hands for the hour and minutes as well. This piece is in white gold, 35 millimeters in diameter. And as lot 25 in this auction, the Breguet Classique tourbillon with diamonds and an engine turns mother of pearl dial, reference 3358. This piece sold for 55,750. Lot 26 is Vacheron Constantin retrograde piece, a day date, which has a retrograde date hand, a Vacheron Constantin patrimony in 18-karat white gold, 37 millimeters in diameter, with beefy stepped lugs, an off-white dial, Roman numerals alternate with polished gold beads for the hour markers. There's a subsidiary dial for the day, and in the form of an downward facing crescent, you have the indication of the dates in the upper half of the dial, and that is done with an arrow-tipped retrograde hand, which snaps back at the beginning of each month. Here's a peek at the movements, self-winding. Built on that classic Jeje-le-Coutre base. And of course, the watch is presented on a leather strap with a matching tang buckle, interpolating that Maltese cross design, which is also a symbol of the brand. This is the Vacheron Constantin patrimony day dates with a retrograde date indicator at lot 26, and it hammered at 12,550, which is, no, it's not chump change, but it's a decent deal to acquire a piece like this. Perhaps not the most elegant, not the most complicated Vacheron, not necessarily from their best time period, from their most distinguished era, but still a supremely elegant and distinctly designed watch by one of the best makers at that price point. Let's continue with Vacheron Constantin, this time a watch that did not sell. This was a piece from their Les Historiques series. The Historique is Vacheron Constantin's collection where they leverage the fact that they are the oldest continuously operating watch manufacturer in the entire world, and that they have an incredible archive of classic and daring horological designs in their back catalog. This piece, Toledo, that was revived in the recent past, is it goes back to some of the models they had in terms of what they call the chocolate bar, so to speak, chocolatone, since the shape of the case has that sort of shape that invokes chocolate, or a piece of chocolate, rather. This is a triple calendar with a moon phase. I think it's a very pleasing design. It's a very interesting design. Vintage examples of these are extremely desirable, but perhaps the modern rendition did not have a lot of fans. I kind of like it. I think to me, this is a much more attractive watch than the Patrimony that we were just looking at. Perhaps it's more obviously vintage inspired. Perhaps it's somewhat small for certain people, even though at 35.7 by 41, it's not really all that small. But overall, you have a very interesting piece here at lot 31, which unfortunately didn't sell, but actually I think certainly deserved a second look, especially considering that it arrives as a full set. In white gold. The reserve wasn't met at 12,550, which I think is reasonable, right? Because I don't think anyone would go for the buy it now price, which was fixed at 17,100. But perhaps at or around 12,000, this would have been an interesting watch. This would have been, in fact, a good watch to pick up. But once again, it's been held back for what I consider to be an unreasonably high reserve price. I think I have time to go through at least a handful more watches. Let's see how this shaped up. Lot 36, we looked at this two-tone Daytona reference 116523 with the so-called racing dial, matte blue with oversized Arabic numerals for hour markers radially arrayed around the center of the dial, and with red accents on the chronograph subdials as well. I think this is a beautiful version of the two-tone with a dial that is not making a comeback anytime soon and is now long discontinued. I've always been a fan of the racing dials, but again, it's one of those designs, one of those design details that actually divide opinion and that offer a lot of interesting deals on the secondary markets. I mean, you don't have to look here necessarily. Go pull up a few listings from eBay or Chrono24. A lot of interesting deals going on here. That was one of the reasons why Archie had one in his collection at a certain point in time. He ended up selling it, I think, before each and every single Daytona, all different kinds of Daytona became hyped up. That hype seems to have lessened significantly, but it hasn't died down completely, which brings us to this point, right? The reserve was not met at 20,500. But I don't think this watch is worth 26,200 in this market, which is where they had fixed up the buy it now price. And I personally wouldn't pay anywhere near that amount or even $20,000. So I think once again, this is one of those points in the market. Like if you like two-tone Daytonas, for example, you can afford to wait a few more months. And I think the deals are going to continue to get better and better towards the end of the year. Again, it's not a point in time now. It's not a time in the market where anything and everything that is associated with Rolex, Patek, AP, anything and everything that is a Daytona, that is a Royal Oak, that is a Nautilus, is simply selling way above the retail pricing, with lots of premium, multiple times its previous market value. It's just those things are not happening anymore, and I wouldn't expect that kind of speculative behavior and trend to come back anytime soon either. So we're going to see more and more these kinds of sales or auctions where perhaps the reserve wouldn't be hit because the sellers are still dragging their feet in so many ways. But eventually, if they want to move these pieces, the prices are going to come way down. We have two examples of the Starbucks, the 126610 LV, back to back at lot 37 and 38. Each of them was listed right around 20,000 with the buy it now price, and neither one of them sold because the reserve price was not met. Another watch that was quite interesting in terms of its historical significance and that it didn't sell was a vintage Speedmaster Ultraman. This is actually the original version, the vintage version, so to speak, that comes supposedly, at least, because once again, it's not pictured, with the archival extract that confirms that this belongs to those series of watches that were originally fitted with the orange chronograph seconds hand. There were no pictures and no real detailed explanation of this particular watch. So it's very hard to, trust and go with a piece like this, even when it's this sort of public auction. Especially when the prices are so high, right? The buy it now price was almost $50,000, 48,900. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and the highest bid didn't even break 30,000. So it was nowhere near that. There are a few interesting newer watches. I thought it was fascinating that the Bel Canto in blue sold for less than what they list for, I think, originally. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think the Bel Canto on I want to say on the strap is perhaps already what, 4,000 or maybe more. What is it? Let me double check their page. Of course, a lot of this stuff is discontinued. Now, I think that particular blue is done and dusted and gone. Oh, okay, I think it was 4,000. So here, and it's basically in new condition with no sign of wear, with 2 extra straps, with the blue dial. And again, the piece was listed at $8,000 for the buy it now option. And I guess I don't need to tell you how unrealistic that was. And the piece actually sold for 5,250, which again seems okay, considering how much of a hype these pieces generated when they first came out. Honestly, I'm not unhappy to see that it's dying down a little bit, because I thought people were getting carried away a little too much for a chiming watch that just sounds the hour when it's active. I don't think that's much of an achievement. I like, again, I used to like how Christopher Ward had moved away over the years from having this strong homage vibe to something different. But I feel like with the visual aesthetic of the Bel Canto and later the so-called 12, they seem to be slipping back to this territory where their watches, at least visually, resemble other brands, and sometimes brands that are just not really at the same level. So that's really disappointing. RT Lange und Söhne says, enjoyed the banter with you and Watch Reporter. He definitely livens up the show. Look, I mean, I like the guy. I'm open to collaboration. Whether it is on his platform or mine, I'm always open, as long as it fits my schedule. These days, I'm kind of busy. As you can see, I usually aspire to start my own live show at 8 p.m., but sometimes I haven't even, I'm not even home at 8 p.m. It takes me until like, almost 8:30, and then, I need to get a bite of something and then start the show. But as I told you guys, I'm going to be full-time on social media and YouTube starting with May. So these live shows are going to become more frequent, and I think I'm going to do like a 2-hour one at around noon my time, and then a 4-hour one, or maybe a 5-hour one in the evening, from 8 to 12, or maybe 7 to 12, something like that. We'll see. We'll figure it out as we go. The live stream of component of the channel is still going to be there, still going to be strong, still going to be the core of the operation. But obviously, the goal is to create more content, more videos with a higher production quality, but at least initially with a higher quantity, and always, as always, in either case, focusing on substance, on real horological content, as far as my contribution goes, right? For others who jump on the panel, who come to collaborate, or who seek out my help and company in other ways, I'm very open-minded. I'm much more broadly conscious of, like you said, diversifying things, because I know my strengths, I know what I can do, I know what I can't do. So it's always good to have at least one more person as a sounding board, at least, right? As someone to have a discussion, have a conversation. It's good when it's different energies. I think that kind of contrast always generates good content. But sometimes having even one person at all always helps. And again, as much as I love and I have all the ability to run a show on my own, I always appreciate when someone is actually part of my panel. Sometimes people think I'm just saying that, but I actually mean it. I actually do mean it, because it's really ultimately great fun. That's why we are here, for these conversations. All right, so let's maybe do 2 more watches. This bel canto with the blue dial actually sold for 5,300, which seems interesting enough, if not necessarily the deal of the century, for a watch that at least, for a hot 2 seconds there, had something of a hype behind it. That was lot 54. Lot 53 is an AP Royal Oak, another one that didn't sell. It was in stainless steel, 37 millimeter case, 15451 from 2017. Quite mint, seemingly unworn, with a black dial. The bidding went all the way up to 47,800, but the reserve was not met, and that highest bid was still far away from the buy it now price as well, which was set at 55,700. I have two more watches here that I want to cover before wrapping things up. I'll be back on Thursday. As I mentioned, we will be celebrating then 2 years of watches and style. I have been producing videos here, creating content on this channel for 2 years now, and ending February, the leap year, on February 29, with that energy, with that celebration, will be a great way to cap off the first 2 months of the year. I've shared the link there, so please save the time, save the dates, and hit the like button in advance if you can. And feel free to share with others and invite friends. As you guys know, Konstantin Chaikin is a watchmaker that I really like and that I enjoy. Of course, his popularity has perhaps done as much good as it did for the commercial success of his brands. It also seems to have somehow pigeonholed his creations into a particular category. People forget about Chaikin's credentials as an independent watchmaker, the respect he inspires in his peers, his fellow members of AHCI, the Academy of Independent Horological Creators, the Academy of Independent Watchmakers, we can say more simply. He has made many interesting complications over the years, but it was a watch that he created in the last minutes for the trade show in 2019 that broke him into this mainstream consciousness, the Joker watch. And since then, a lot of his energies are going into releasing these pieces year by year, different designs. Most recently, he collaborated with Louis Erard, which is a brand that already specializes in regulator dials that puts the seconds hand into the center. So he came up with this unique version of his wrist monster as a watch that is called the Time Eater. There have been already 2 editions, both of which are sold in an example here. Incidentally, 39 millimeter and 42 millimeter. Incidentally, Konstantin Chaikin also was honored by Ineichen Zurich last year with a themed auction that focused exclusively on his work, and I covered that auction too. If you go back, you will easily find the link. Let me see if I can quickly reach it. But here, of course, oh yeah, I found it very easily actually. So I'm going to just share it. The only problem is I look like a douchebag, which might be a fact for a more regular basis, but I had a bloodshot eye at the time, so I actually am appearing on that day with sunglasses on, which looks awful, but it is what it is. But that was a great auction, and I think my coverage of it was not too shabby either. So feel free to check it out at the link I provide on your own time. But please give a like in advance. This particular version of the Louis Erard collaboration has an hour hand in terms of that single Cyclops eye at 12 o'clock. It has a centrally deployed minute hands, and then it has this gear-like disc that turns at the mouth of the monster at 6 o'clock, which serves as a unique seconds indicator as well. This piece actually didn't sell. The highest bid was 3,900. The buy it now price again was also extremely optimistic. I think they sold these pieces for around 4,000 in Swiss francs. So you might say it could have been reasonable to have a reserve right around 4,000. I have a feeling that was much higher. And once again, they don't realize. I mean, it's over. It's over. It's not, it doesn't matter if things are limited or interesting, if they're sold out or not. We don't exist at a moment in time, um, at a point in the market where everything can bring on a premium. People have to come to terms with the fact that sometimes they're simply going to lose on some watches, especially if they have overpaid, especially if they have followed the hype and went after a watch that everyone else did and paid a premium for it. If you have grown out of love with it in such a short period of time and you want to now sell it, you have to come to terms with the fact that you might lose money on it. Lot 55 didn't sell because of the unrealistic and high reserve. I'm going to do the last watch now for tonight's coverage. If you want to contribute to the channel, you know how. Increasingly, there's more and more exclusive content for the members. So becoming a member to the channel is a great way of supporting the work I do on this channel. As you guys know, I don't have any sponsors. I don't have no masters. I don't serve anyone else but my audience, which means I'm beholden to your contributions as well. And of course, super chats, super stickers, everything is available through YouTube. But if you want to contribute in some other ways, the links are provided in the video description as well. If nothing else, just hitting the like button and sharing the videos, sharing the link to the channel, spreading the word would be a great way to help me expand this community. And finally, of course, I'm grateful for your support and presence in either case. This is lot 56, the newer iteration of the Louis Erard Konstantin Chaikin collaboration with Bloodshot Eye, incidentally, on that time meter regulator. This is a 42 millimeter version. I think this edition was called from dusk to dawn in 42 millimeters. Another example that didn't sell. Again, full set, barely worn. The bids didn't even reach 3,500. I think these pieces were listed again around 4,000 in Swiss francs, 3,500, 4,000 in US dollars. If you're really desperate to get the watch, I think that's not so unreasonable. But the kind of pricing they have here, I think, again, is a little delusional or simply out of touch. I never understood that, but once again, we have a piece that didn't sell. All right, that's it for today. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for writing your comments and questions in the chats. Thank you, Claude Ken, for your super sticker, which reminded everyone with a thumbs up to upvote, to like the stream. It helps a great deal, again, for a small channel. More exposure brings more eyes onto the work I do. That's always helpful. Please share the link. Please help me spread the words. The channel is growing, and it has the potential to grow much bigger with your help. And, this is practically the only channel where you don't have any outside interests. We have all sorts of content, but also regular live streams where you can listen to my unfiltered, unbiased takes that don't serve any industry interests. And also, anything that you put into the channel comes back to you in terms of the quality and quantity of content. And that's been the case for the last 2 years, and it will be that way for many, many years to come. In either case, I'm saying goodbye tonight. It is past midnight now by several minutes. Once again, I look forward to seeing you in 2 days on Thursday night. Hopefully we'll make a marathon out of it, but I will start at least at 8 p.m. and go until midnight, and we'll get to celebrate 2 years of Watches and Style. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, wear and enjoy your watches. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.